Question 16. 1440 divided by 12. Well, there's a couple of ways we could do this. We could do the chunking method, in which case we're going to need to repeatedly subtract chunks of 12. So let's have a think about what our chunks of 12 could be. So we could have 1 times 12, 10 times 12, 100 times 12. We could have 2 times 12. We could have 20 times 12. We could have 200 times 12. And we could have 5 times 12. So let's work out what those chunks are. So 1 12 is 12. 10 12s is going to be 12 with 1 0 on the end, so 120. And 112 is going to be 12 with 2 zeros on the end, so 1200. 2 12s is 24. So 20 12s is going to be 24 with an extra 0, 240. And 212s is going to be 24 with 2 extra zeros, 2500. The only other chunk that might be a little bit tricky is 5 12s, but 5 12s is going to be basically half of whatever 10 12s is. So 10 12s is 120, 5 12s is half of that, half of 120 is 60. Now we need to decide what we're going to subtract from 1440. So let's set it up. 1440, I'm going to divide by 12. So when you're doing the chunking method, you always subtract the biggest number that you can. So, but you can't go over 1440. So I can't subtract this one, 2400, because that's too big. So that's actually going to be no use. But I could subtract 1200. So if I subtract 1200, I can work out what I've got left. But remember, you can't just subtract 1200. You must say what chunk of 12s that is, and it's this chunk here. It's a chunk of 100 12s. Okay, write that at the side because we're going to need to add these chunks up at the end. Now we're ready to subtract it. So 0 take 0 is 0, 4 take 0 is 4, 4 take 2 is 2, and 1 take 1 is nothing. So we're down to 240. Now we go back to the chunks and we say what is the biggest number I can take off now. So from 240 I could actually take off exactly 240. So if I take off 240, that is a chunk of 20 12s. Okay, now 240 take off 240 is going to get me down to 0. And once you're down to 0, you've achieved what you wanted to do, because you're trying to say how many lots of 12 go exactly into 1440. And all we've got to do now is say, well, this was 100 lots and this was 20 lots. So altogether, if we add those together, there is 120 lots of 12 that went into 1440. So your final answer is 120. Just a little note before we move on. This has got down to 0, and most of the time it will get down to 0. If it doesn't get down to 0, then you've either made a mistake, and sometimes people can make a mistake with their subtraction. So if it doesn't get down to 0, you might have made a mistake with your subtraction, so you have to go back and check. But if you haven't made a mistake with subtraction, that means that whatever's left is going to be a remainder. So let's say we got down to here and there was like 7 left. That means it would be remainder 7. It would be 120 remainder 7. Okay, so if it doesn't go to 0, you've either made a mistake, so you need to check subtraction, or there is a remainder. But in this particular case, it did go down to 0, so there's no remainder.